Well, tonight I talk with an award-winning author who wrote his most recent book about Bigfoot, UFOs, and the paranormal, and shares some of his own intriguing stories about these unexplained phenomena on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and it's really good to be back here with you once again after a bit of a pause. Apologize, I was only able to get one episode out last month in early July. Lost my mother to cancer last month, so it's been a bit of a rough patch, and still kind of picking up the pieces, but it feels good to be back in the saddle again. And looking forward to talking with Paul Buckner. He is an award-winning author, and to talk about his intriguing stories about Bigfoot, UFOs, and the paranormal. If you haven't been over to the website yet, please visit us at theParanormal.com, and on Facebook at facebook.com/passion, the paranormal. If you know a friend, family member, coworker you think that would like to check out the show, let them know about it. Share a link with them. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast app you're using, and you will get notified when any new episodes drop. And I'm really eager to get into discussion with Paul, and really hope you're going to enjoy this discussion. Paul's a great writer, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his take on some of these unexplained phenomena like Bigfoot and UFOs. And so really looking forward to getting into this, and thank you so much for tuning into the show. Okay, so my guest tonight is Paul Buckner. And Paul is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, author, musician, and an avid outdoorsman. The oral tradition of his Cherokee family drove him to collect folktales and stories of those he met in his travels across the United States. Many of those stories have been passed down through several generations, and it is these stories that provide inspiration for his writing. Paul grew up in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains, and as a young boy spent many summers in the woods or on the lakes, creeks, and rivers, hunting, fishing, and camping. Those experiences led to a deep respect for the outdoors, traditional ways, and the natural environment. Paul is also an award-winning Amazon top-selling author of the action-adventure series Hawthorne Lake and its associated short story, The Lost Gold Mine of Idaho Springs. His latest book is Bigfoot, UFOs, and the Paranormal: True Encounters, which we're going to be talking about tonight. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's always great to have someone of your acumen with writing and the success you've had with that. And really particularly interested in the latest book you wrote, and your stories about the paranormal and unexplained and Bigfoot and UFOs, all that fun and great stuff we talk about on my show here. So, but maybe before we get into any of those specific stories, maybe you can take us back and let us know how this journey began and how you decided to write about the strange and unusual paranormal type stuff and Bigfoot and UFOs and all that good stuff.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've always been fascinated with each of these subjects for as early as I can remember. You know, growing up here in the heart of the Cherokee Nation Reservation in northeastern Oklahoma, you're basically located in the foothills of the Ozarks, around the towns of Stillwell and Tahlequah are the closest ones, and they're fairly small towns, so you're geographically challenged, so to speak. You're in the country. My dad and uncles, they all worked in construction, and they traveled all over the 14-county tribal jurisdictional area. So in the summer months, when us kids really had nothing better to do, we would, usually go with our dads and work on these construction projects across the country here. And I don't think we ever were much help more than cleaning up around the jobs, though. But I think they just kept us out of our mom's hair more than anything. But
sure,
on these drives to the job sites, I think that's where I learned the art of storytelling from my dad and my uncles and the folks that they worked with. During the drives, on the breaks, the lunch breaks, And as a kid, listening to all these different stories was just fascinating. Most of these folks that worked on these job sites all lived and worked in the area, and most of the stories were centered around the woods and the lakes, hunting, fishing, and I think some of the most memorable stories were that about Bigfoot and just other strange encounters. So I think that's where my fascination really, really stemmed from.
Yeah, that's always interesting to hear those stories. And I live in northern Utah. We've had our fair share of Bigfoot encounters here. In fact, there's several videos out there we've had of people who, a couple of them have seemed pretty authentic, at least initially. Now, I'm no expert in video analysis, but we've had some quite interesting ones there. So I imagine you probably had some as well. Have you had a lot of people share their stories with you, Paul?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. And, growing up, too, once, I guess, late teenage years, being a musician, I actually traveled around the country quite a bit, playing music. And that really allowed me to talk to folks from all over the country, all over the South, way up north, we've probably covered over 40 different states. And that was the really fantastic thing about being able to travel, is just talking to folks and getting their stories, and especially the Native American community, because being Cherokee here, our roots are within our stories, our family stories, our community stories, and our tribal stories. Everything is centered around that story. When you meet new people, it's about their story and how they tell it and what they believe. So that really allowed me to explore those types of phenomena even more, because even way back then in the 80s, of course, we didn't have cell phones like we do today. So it was really all about that face-to-face communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, being that you have Native American background, what was kind of your sense of a lot of the family members you had? Were they believers in Bigfoot as a whole?
Well, in my area, especially with the Cherokee Nation, if you do a little bit of research there, with the Cherokee people, there's not really a lot of stories that center around Bigfoot, but there are lots of stories that revolve around other paranormal type things, from witches to the little people, to different stories like that obviously have come down from tradition, and that.
Paul, are you there?
Yeah. I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry I lost you for a minute there. So yeah, we were just talking about, you were getting into the story about Native American tradition and some of the kind of the paranormal side of them. So if you can kind of take us back to that, where you just start talking about kind of some of the paranormal sides of the Cherokee stories that kind of got passed down to you.
Yeah, with the Cherokee stories, like I was saying, we probably lost the audio there, but there's traditional stories that come down from your family, and then there's other a micro to macro level way of looking at it. You've got those family stories, but then you've got the tribal stories too. They're just as traditional and probably even older. And the way these stories come down, you got to look at it like, there used to be a game that we played when we were kids where we would sit around in a circle and one person would whisper a story to the next person and pass that around. And by the time that story got all the way back around to where it started, the story had taken on a completely different shape. Everybody adds their own nuance to that particular story. So, being an oral tradition, like most Native American tribes, if you think about it in that particular context, with those stories that are passed down from storyteller to storyteller, you could realize that, or I think you would realize that how those stories have changed throughout the generations, from one storyteller to the next. That little nuance that one person may have added to it that the next person doesn't. So those stories can change over time.
Sure.
I think but there's still that basic fundamental baseline to every story, and each one of them they have to come from somewhere.
Now, Paul, there's a lot of Native Americans out there that talk about different paranormal type entities, wendigos, skinwalkers, those sorts of things. Were those kinds of stories passed down to you?
Not really. Not many stories like that. The Wendigo and the Skinwalkers, not so much with the Cherokee Nation. And there's three different tribes, three of the federally recognized tribes to the Cherokee Nation. Well, there's Cherokee Nation, then there's the Eastern Band of Cherokee, and then there's the Katua Band. So the Eastern Band, of course, is still, they're located out in North Carolina there. But the Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma, we've only been in Oklahoma since the Removal Act. So a lot of those stories, I think, have changed through the years, and they're different than the ones that the Eastern Band would have, and they may be even different than some of the ones that the Katua Band have. So those stories, even though they have some familiarity and similarities to them, they're a little bit different. But for the most part, the Cherokee, we have there's lots of stories about witches and Spearfinger and the Little People and things like that. But looking at it from like what is described as the Wendigo and the Skinwalkers, we really didn't have those types of stories like that. Not in my family. The ones that we talked about more than anything were the ones like Spearfinger and other witches and things like that. So I don't have really a strong background in those tribes that have those types of stories, but I have talked to and interviewed so many different people through the years like that, and they're just utterly fascinating stories.
Yeah, you talk about early on in the book about an experience, and I think it was not necessarily, you don't describe it necessarily as your own personal experience per se, but as one that it was kind of almost like a shared experience. Maybe if you could talk about that strange experience you mentioned in the book.
Oh, yeah. One of the earlier experiences that really, I think, got me hooked, and it really set the tone for me digging into this, into Bigfoot. I was a kid, probably about 10, 11 years old, and this happened back in about 1979. So it's quite some time ago, and it's obviously long before cell phones. Well, one day I was on the job site with my dad and uncle and my cousin, who was about my age, when a neighbor to one of the job sites there had come over there and asked me and my cousin where our dads were. And, we pointed to the area where they were at in the house, and then we turned back to what we were doing. And a few minutes later, my dad and uncle come out of the house in a hurry and just told us boys to get in the truck. Apparently, my aunt had called the neighbor's house and asked him to tell my uncle that she needed him home as quickly as possible. And back then, that's a good indicator that something really is wrong. He didn't say what it was or anything about it. He just said that she told him that they needed to get home as quickly as possible. Now, when we arrived at their house, went to the door, it was locked. My uncle, he knocked real loud, and he's digging around for his keys. But when we finally got into the house, it was dark and quiet and locked up tight as a drum. But he found my aunt hiding in the back room. And when she came out, as a boy, I could see how scared she was. And after the story she told us, I could see why. They lived on a small farm with the nearest neighbor of more than a few miles away. And she had been outside hanging laundry when she noticed something in one of the pastures behind the house. At first, she thought it may have been a cow, and she really didn't think much of it. But as she continued hanging laundry, it crept in closer and closer until she could finally make out the dark silhouette of what she thought was a person. But this person just stood there, just appearing to watch her. Kind of creeped her out. Well, it was still some distance away, but she said it was definitely on two legs. She thought maybe this person was from a nearby farm or something, looking for some strayed livestock or something, but the figure was very dark. She said at one point she waved at it, thinking that, well, okay, if it's a neighbor or something, they'll surely wave back, but she didn't get a response. And that really made her nervous, even more so. But as she watched it, the figure would creep in a little closer at a time, just a little at a time. And she continued what she was doing, but she was very leery, and she kept a watch on it because it would just stand there for a long time just watching. So a few minutes later, she could see that the figure was really large and all just one color from head to toe black. That's when she said it grunted at her, and that's when she lost it. She ran into the house, and that's when she called the neighbor to this house where my uncle and dad were working. And she swears that it was not a bear, and she's a country girl. You know, she grew up in the country, and she knows what a bear would look like. And quite honestly, bear sightings were incredibly rare in Oklahoma at that time anyway. And the ones around here were pretty small. But she told us once she was inside, she looked out the window and she watched this thing move off toward the barn, and it was really fast and really large. And she was just shaking this whole time while she was telling this story to us. And I remember the fear and the terror in her eyes. She said it took one of the bottle caps with her and went back the way it came, right back over the hill down the pasture. Well, my uncle and dad grabbed a gun, and we went out to the barn, and we were looking around, and sure enough, my uncle said that one of the bottle caps were missing, and there were a few footprints around that barn, and I remember that as a kid, that these footprints were like twice as big as mine. So that was, we looked and searched around all that day, and never saw sight of it again. But it was, that's the story that really got me intrigued with this.
Yeah, now, Paul, did your family call law enforcement? Was anybody brought in to kind of research or investigate?
Yeah, she had called the local sheriff, and they sent a deputy out, but they really didn't find anything, and really didn't even take a report because there wasn't anything to report other than a missing calf. And you know, in the country and that's not really that big of a deal. It is to the farmer, of course, but not to the local sheriff. They're going to just tell you that, well, keep an eye out.
Sure. Now, I know I've heard of many reports that have been put out in Oklahoma. And of course, these are not any specific regions of Oklahoma, just that I've heard. But the Ozark Mountain area where you grew up, was that, from your perspective, kind of considered a Bigfoot hotspot?
Well, you know, I believe it was, because there were several sightings around. I remember growing up, you know, as a kid, there was one major sighting that happened not too far from our house, where it was reported that a creature broke into a chicken house in Dutch Mills, Arkansas, which was just a few miles away from us. And apparently this creature broke in and grabbed some chickens and was running out, and the chicken farmer there had grabbed a shotgun and went out there, and when he heard all this commotion going on, it was in the middle of the night, and when he went outside, the whole door had been ripped off of the chicken house, and he heard something thumping away. He said you could feel the ground just shaking under with each big step. And he had a flashlight with him. He shined a flashlight on it, and he could see something running away with the chickens in one large hand. And he said he shot at it, but didn't hit it. And that was it had to be the late 70s when this happened, and there were several articles written in the newspaper about it. And then after that particular sighting, over the next few months, there had been other reports of the same type of creature breaking into other houses around there.
Yeah. Now, you've had a lot of stories shared with you. What about, you often hear about smells, strange smells, in relation to Bigfoot sightings. Any of that kind of stuff about strange smells in the area get reported? Did you hear stories about that?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the things that was always the running joke. You know, when you're telling stories when you're out camping or hunting or something, you know, you tell somebody, well, just make sure that you keep an eye out, and if you smell anything funny, you know, Bigfoot's going to be around. You know, and it came from those stories, because that's one of the ways that folks had described it, with a very strong odor. Even the one at Dutch Mills, they said that they had found some hair samples, and the smell was just horrendous. But you know, that was one of those things too, where if you're breaking into a chicken house, chicken houses have a notorious bad smell anyway. So.
For sure. Now, Paul, talk about, did you have any experiences when you were young, personal experiences? I know you mentioned the one with your aunt, and if so, when did that first happen for you?
Well, I didn't have any experiences when I was a kid. It was much later in time that I had an experience, and I've had two, actually. And one time, the first time, was a hunting trip in Missouri. And on this particular hunting trip, you know, when we go hunting, it's usually October 1st through December. We're in the woods. And during any time of the day, we're in the woods, you know, at 4:30 in the morning when it's still dark for a couple of hours, you know, before the sun ever comes up. And we'll stay out there all day long. And on this particular time, I had gotten up, and I was going to be going to a different location than my other two buddies that I was hunting with. And this was back in 91. I got up about 4 o'clock, and I left the cabin before they were even out of bed. And I was going to make the long trek through one particular section of woods and across the river, where I knew there was a low spot where I could cross. And as I'm walking through the woods and I'm getting closer to where I'm placing my tree stand, I hear something in the woods, in the dark, not far from me. And as I walk, you know, you could hear the leaves under your feet, because it was kind of dry at a particular time. And I would stop every few minutes and listen and look around. I had a small flashlight with me, and I didn't really see anything. And I would walk a little bit further, and I would still hear this sound. And then, I don't know, it was not too far from where my tree stand was. I heard this loud crash, just a huge crash in the underbrush, and I heard this thump, like something had jumped down out of a tree or something, and it hit the ground and ran off. I didn't know what it was, couldn't see it, it was still dark, but I went ahead and got into my tree stand and climbed up. It was a climbing tree stand, so I went ahead and shimmied up the tree as high as I could go. I was probably about 18, 20 feet up. And when it got daylight, I was looking around with my binoculars through the woods and just looking for any sign of deer or anything. Didn't see anything for the longest time, but then I just got this strange, that feeling, when you feel like somebody's in the room with you or walking behind you or something. And when you're hunting in a tree stand like that, you want to be as still as possible. Well, I slowly turned, and when I did, I turned to my left side because I'm right-handed. That's just the natural way I would turn to look where I could see the furthest distance. I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I couldn't make it out, but it was just slightest movement. And that's what you're looking for when you're in the woods anyway, and you're hunting. You're looking for that strange movement that your eyes will just naturally pick up. And then I tried to zero in on. Well, I couldn't see it, but I turned my scope around over there and was looking through my scope when I heard the crashing of the underbrush again, but further over to my left, and I couldn't turn in time. But something ran out of there, and I just saw a glimpse of something dark. And as a hunter, I know when something is running on 4 legs or 2 legs. I mean, it's a very distinct sound. Right. And whatever this was on 2 feet. And there were no other people out there that should have been in our area hunting for miles. So that was, I couldn't say one way or another what that was, if it was a person or if it was Bigfoot or what have you. So that was the first experience that I had. But a few years later, here in just outside of Tahlequah, Oklahoma, when I was driving home late one night about 2:30 in the morning, I saw something on the side of the road stand up as I'm driving by, and the headlights are shining. And it stands up, and it just turns into the woods and walks out into the woods as I drive on by. And I know it wasn't the shadows. I could see it clearly in my headlights. This was a large person or creature that was covered head to toe in dark clothing or dark hair or dark fur. Those were the only 2 really experiences that I had personally.
Yeah, now that first experience you mentioned while you were hunting, it seems like you had a pretty darn good idea that you guys were that you and the people you were hunting with were the only ones in that area.
Yeah.
I'm sure you knew it was none of the other hunters that were with you, correct?
Oh yeah, it was definitely not them. They were hunting in a section farther away from me, and we had walkie-talkies that we used then. And whenever they were heading into the woods, they called me, which was a little bit later than when I saw that and had that experience, because they were just late getting up that morning. So they called me to tell me that they were headed into the woods to their spot. That way we always check in with each other and know that when somebody else is in the woods and where they're at. Sure.
Yeah, and talk about how remote was this area that you were hunting in?
Oh, it was pretty remote, outside of Richmond, Missouri, there on the Crooked River, and there's a lot of farms out that way, but in the place where we were hunting, there was the closest house was a couple of miles away, and on the other side of the river. So there shouldn't have been anybody there at that time of morning. Even the most prolific hunters, they're not going to be on somebody else's property that early in the morning.
Sure. Now the hunters you've hunted with, or people you've known that hunt in the area where you're from, any stories from them, any unusual stories that they shared with you?
There's been a few, and one of them I actually talk about in the book, that I had met a guy that I was hunting up in Colorado, And his story was fascinating. And, he saw not just one creature, but possibly a couple of them. And the way that he described these creatures were not like your typical Bigfoot encounter that it's a big, hulky creature with, wide shoulders and low brow and 7-8 foot tall. He described these much more light and athletic and long arms and legs and very quick and agile and athletic. And I think that was a very interesting story. And he firmly believed in what he was talking about. And I think that was another thing that's really fascinating is about all the different stories and the different encounters that people have and the way that they describe the creature. And there's just so many different descriptions other than your typical, big hulking feature.
Sure. Now, let's talk a little bit about, so we've been talking more about the Bigfoot side of things. Now, what about UFOs and you writing about those? What led you in that direction as well?
The UFO phenomenon to me is really intriguing. One of the stories that I actually covered in the book it was really the catalyst to get me involved in UFOs and researching that more. And it was another late evening coming home with my wife and I, and we had stopped at a convenience store in town, and this is a small town, one stoplight town. And I was getting gas while she went in to pay for this, and this was a kind of a chilly fall night, late fall, early winter evening, and it was kind of misty outside and cold. And there was nobody else in town. There's no other traffic, no other cars. This is probably about 11 o'clock at night or so. And as I'm getting gas, like I said, my wife was inside. I'm getting gas, and there's this weird vibrating humming sound that just kind of crept up on me. And I'm standing there thinking, okay, this is getting louder. I don't see any large trucks or anything like that could be, starting up and rumbling, and that low frequency rumble, you can feel that. And it was kind of like that, but there wasn't anything around, even close that we could see. Nothing. The place was asleep. Well, when she came walking out, she looked up, and that's when I looked up too. There was, I know it sounds crazy, but there was this huge object above us that couldn't have been more than 100 feet above us. Now, this is at night, and the lights are shining into this mist, and it's creating these little halos and stuff, but you could see this clearly. It was huge. It looked the size of a football field, and it was just slowly passing over. And it felt like you could pick up a rock and throw and hit it. It was that close, but it was just looming over us. And we stood there and watched this thing for, I don't know, maybe a good 30 seconds before it finally just kind of disappeared into the darkness. And finally, the sound went away with it. And that was unlike anything I've ever seen, experienced, heard about, because this thing the bottom of it was completely flat. But you could see where there were seams, or what appeared to be seams along it, creating these little panels, if you will. So that was my first experience with something like that, and I'll tell you, that was something that you just don't forget.
Now, Paul, talk about your emotions at the time you're seeing this. Any fear associated with it? What were you feeling, or was it just utter awe?
Well, it was definitely utter awe. I don't think I felt afraid. I just felt small and insignificant to this thing. I mean, it's like you're watching these movies, right, with like Godzilla or something, and you're thinking, wow, this thing is, 50 foot tall, and if you see something like that, that's the size of a tree. That's just huge, and you feel so small to that, and that's what I felt like. You're just so small and insignificant to this thing, because it was massive.
Now, I know you said visibility wasn't great, but were you able to kind of make out shape and form and maybe, I think you said this thing was about football field length. How about height-wise? Were you able to kind of get an idea of that?
No, couldn't really make out any height or any other of the structure other than the bottom of it, because it was so low to the ground and directly above us. But it was moving off, just at a slow, steady rate. And like I said, you could see these looked like panels or something underneath it, where there were seams along it, and it appeared to be a dark gray metal, but like once again in the dark with the lights shining up like that, these big street lights and stuff out there. I don't know if that was the exact color or not, but yeah, I couldn't really make out any other shape other than it did seem like it was pointed on one end and flat on the back end as it moved over us.
So almost kind of a triangular,
right,
bottom shape. Right. Okay, yeah, those are reported a lot. And talk about kind of your thoughts on UFOs and the subject. Prior to experiencing that, were you a believer in that, and did this make you a believer?
Well, before that, I don't think I really gave it much attention. Of course, you hear all the stories and you watch all the movies and stuff, but without experiencing something of that magnitude, I don't think you truly have a real understanding of it. So it's one of those things that's you don't really. It's there in the back of your mind that, yeah, it's possible, but, it's never happened to me, so, you just kind of blow it off. But after that, yeah, I was a definite believer. There is something to it.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, did this kind of lead you into researching the subject more? What kind of, what direction did you take after having that experience? Did you kind of delve into it a lot deeper after that?
Yeah, I really did. I started researching more articles, newspaper articles, more reports and different things like that I was similar to that. And I tried to interview as many people as I could too, and that really got me on the road to researching more about UFOs, that whole phenomenon, and it's I think now with the advent of the technology that we have today, and the everything from the space telescopes to the communication satellites and different things like that we have, I think it's finally starting to be something that is taken a little bit more seriously, because there's something out there besides just our militaries and other foreign country militaries. There's something else to that these things that are happening that can't be explained through the law of physics that we have today, that we understand.
Yeah, now, Paul, what about researching other UFO sightings similar to in the general area where you saw yours? Were you able to come across some other accounts, UFO reports in and around the area where you had the sighting?
Actually, there were a couple of people that we talked to. Probably about a month later, we finally were able to track down another couple of people that said that they saw something very similar to this, but they didn't really think much about it because of just being so late at night and out in the country, they just they saw something very similar to that, and they described the same type of experience, that it was very low to the ground, but they couldn't see it nearly as well as what we did, but they could feel it more than they could see it. Because they were more in the countryside, just outside of town, so they didn't have the big street lights and stuff that were shining all around. But they described something very similar to that, and what I found really interesting is the fact that they said that they could feel the thumbing, the throbbing, the engines or whatever that was. It was just a low rumble, low frequency rumble. So that was a very similar thing. And and of course, when I talked to them, I didn't tell them about my complete story about what we had witnessed. So I wanted to get their take on it first, and that's what was really fascinating, that they did describe something extremely similar to what we had.
Yeah, now you also get into covering the paranormal, which, some people may say the paranormal is anything unexplainable, scientifically unexplainable. There's also kind of the more narrow definition going on around there, which is more about hauntings and ghosts. And a lot of people use the term paranormal to describe that. But you talk about some things paranormal in the book. Where do you go with the paranormal and talking and covering that in the book?
Well, there's a lot of different elements to, like you say, paranormal. And people talk about experiences with ghosts or spirits and different things like that. One of the things that I think is really fascinating is sleep paralysis, and what people have that I've interviewed said that they saw during these episodes. Because I had one experience like that myself that was very disturbing, and that's kind of one of those subjects that I really I've delved into a little bit more, and I really want to see what that common denominator is, because I think with my particular experience with sleep paralysis and what I saw and felt and experienced during this episode was well, it was very interesting, and it wasn't anything that was an isolated type of incident. I've heard lots of different interviews with folks that had a very similar experience, but others have even wild experiences during these sleep paralysis episodes. So that's one area that I'm just really fascinated with.
Yeah, and I think, maybe more the hardcore skeptics or cynics will say, well, you're kind of in a paralysis type state. Your brain perhaps is in a hallucinatory type state. But what's kind of your take on that when you hear that? Are you kind of more in belief that this is something real, truly paranormal?
Well, I understand that, the mind it's a very powerful thing that we don't have, complete control over all the time in our subconscious, of course. So I think our experiences during the day, during the week, over time, they are stored there. And when you are in these, states, whether it's you're in REM sleep or not, or just right on that verge, I think your mind does do things, because everybody dreams at some point. And the thing that I felt very compelling about this, that I think there is something to it, is I've dreamt all my life just like anybody else. This was not a dream. This happened. I was wide awake. I know I was. And that, I think, therein is the difference to that. It's not something where I had been asleep all night and then it just happened. Because when this happened to me, I had just come home from a fishing trip, and it wasn't too late at night. It was probably about 10:30 or 11 at night, and we had a baby at that time. Well, I come home and I go in and I check his room, and he's not in the crib. He's sleeping with his mom in our bedroom. So I just go ahead and go back to the guest bedroom, and I take a shower and I jump in bed. And as soon as I jump in bed, I am facing the wall away from the door. And I had no more sooner laid down than I hear this thumping across the floor, like somebody was walking into my room very quickly. And I thought, it was my wife getting up to let me, or just to check on me, make sure I was home, and to lock up after me or something, But the footsteps were faster, and then all of a sudden they stopped, and something jumped on top of me, literally holding me down where I could not move. I couldn't talk. I couldn't speak. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't move. Completely frozen. And it just held me down. And I don't know. It must have lasted for at least a good 30 seconds. Like I said, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't scream. I couldn't holler. I couldn't move. And I was wide awake. I know I was. And all of a sudden, it just let go. It was gone. It was off. I flipped the covers off and I rolled over real quick because I thought, well, whoever did this, they're in trouble. There was nobody there. I walked through the house. I looked around everywhere. My wife was still in our bed at the other end of the house with the baby. There was nobody there.
Now, Paul, did you actually see anything when you had this experience?
Here's the thing that I saw. When I spun around like that, I saw a shadow leaving out of my room, because there was a nightlight in the other room where the baby's room was, just across the hall. I saw a shadow move out of the door and down that hall, like somebody had just walked through there. And I couldn't see them, but their shadow was right behind them. That sort of thing. There was nobody in that house. There was no movement. There was no air moving curtains around or anything like that.
That sounds like quite a terrifying experience. And I've also talked to a lot of people who have had sleep paralysis experiences. Anything else strange happen in the house that you had that experience?
In that particular house, there were a few times when there was a few strange things that happened in that particular house. And one of them was, one night I had stayed up kind of late watching TV. And my wife and the baby she had put the baby down in bed. She had gone to bed. So I went through the house, I checked on the baby, and then I made sure the doors were all locked up and everything for the night, and I turned the TV off. And I went into the bedroom and to get ready for bed, and I turned the light out and I lay down in bed, and then I hear the TV on. So I get up and I walk back in the house or into the living room and see that the television is on. So I go over there and to turn it off, and because I had put the remote down on the coffee table. So I walk over there to grab the remote. The remote is not there. I look around all over the house for this remote. Well, it wasn't laying there on the coffee table. But I went over to the TV and I turned the TV off and I went to bed. I thought, well, maybe I'll just lay it down somewhere. I don't know. It was probably a few hours later when the TV clicked on again. And I heard it because I heard the voices. And then I could make it out. It woke me up, and I walked in there and I turned the television off again. But this time the remote was laying right there on the coffee table where I had left it. Nothing else happened that night. But I don't know. It was maybe a week or so later when the same thing happened again. When I went to bed, all the lights were turned off. I put the remote back on the coffee table where I always put it, and the TV turned on again. So I went in there this time, and I unplugged the TV. And here's the funny part. I went back to bed, and no sooner had I laid down in bed, the TV came back on.
Wow.
I had just unplugged the TV, and it was plugged into a little power strip where there was a VCR at that time, and a few other little things that had been plugged into it. I had unplugged the whole thing. I walked back in there, and this is, you're feeling pretty spooked at this time. So I walked back in there. I turned every light in the house on, every light. I'm looking around everywhere because that TV was plugged back in and it was off.
Wow.
So, I don't know. That house was, there were a few experiences like that.
Yeah, Paul, I think if some people would have had that experience, they would have probably been putting that house up for sale in pretty short order.
I think so too.
Let's talk about, there's a lot of stories been shared with you. You cover a lot of ground, I think, in the book. What's a couple of the best stories that were shared with you cover in the book, or just stories that were shared with you that really kind of blew your mind?
Let me take you back here just a bit because the story is in the book. And this was something else that I have to admit I forgot to mention a while ago, but I don't know how I forgot about this. But me and some friends, we would go down to a place here in Oklahoma called Honubby Creek. It's down in southern Oklahoma. We would go down there, and they have one of our buddies has a cabin, and he owns 40 acres up there on the mountain. And we'd go down there and ride four-wheelers all over that WMA there. It's a wildlife management area. There's about 100,000 acres right there in that one particular section, and a lot of people would go down there and go hunting and camping and just all sorts of things like that. But they also did a lot of logging down there. Well, several years ago, I went down there one night, and I was going to meet all of my buddies because they were coming from Tulsa and I was coming from Stillwell, which was totally different directions. And I had a trailer pulling a trailer with some four-wheelers on the back of it. And I drive up to the mountain cabin, and I get there, and it's dark, and up there on the mountain in Honubby, Oklahoma, when it's dark, you can put your hand in front of your eyes. You're not going to see your hand. It's that pitch black dark. And that particular night, there were no stars out. There were no moonlight to light anything up. But the road off to get to the cabins was probably about a mile back there, and it just wound up all through the trees and stuff. And it was basically a Jeep trail. And pulling this trailer, 16-foot flatbed trailer with these four-wheelers on the back of it, you're having to go really slow and get around all these trees and make these hairpin turns. And you finally get down to the cabin, and I'm the first one there. So I get kind of situated, and I back in the trailer there beside the cabin. And I sit there in my truck waiting on the other guys to get there. They shouldn't be too far behind me because we were going to meet about the same time. I'm just sitting there in the dark, and my radio was on, so it's, the dash lights are glowing. And I roll the windows down. It's summertime. It's not too god-awful hot. So I just roll the windows down. I'm just sitting there just listening to the radio. And I think it stays on for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then it shuts off, on its own. Well, when it shut off, it throws you right into pitch black, and it's quiet. And while I'm sitting there, I start hearing all the sounds of the woods. The cicadas are there in the trees, and they're just super loud. You can hear bullfrogs croaking, and just all sounds of nature at night. And it's probably a little after 10 o'clock at night. And as I'm sitting there, I hear this crunching in the leaves beside me, and thinking, well, I don't know what that is. It doesn't sound like it's anything I should be concerned about. All these other animals, all these different things going on. It's probably a raccoon or a possum, or there's no telling what it could be. Well, I keep hearing it, and so I turn around in my seat, in my back seat, and I dig around, get my flashlight out. I don't really see anything with the flashlight. It's just a small one, anyway, you wear on like a brim of your cap or something. So you can kind of see what you're doing with your hands, right there, but you're not going to light anything up around you very much. So I'm just sitting there, and I hear this crunching again, and what it sounds like 3 or 4 footsteps. That kind of got me spooked a little bit because, like I said, it's dark, pitch dark, and there's nobody around, even close. And I'm thinking, well, just for safety's sake, I'm going to go ahead and grab my gun. I think I had my 44 with me at that time. I just kind of put it out there on the console, just for, safety's sake. And I hear this again, and now my flashlight doesn't even work. Low battery, so the thing is dead. And I don't want to start the truck up because it just, shine lights everywhere. And I didn't want to scare whatever it was away. I thought, well, it could be a bear because we've had bears there in the cabins before. Well, a few minutes later, I hear this big crunch again, and it's closer to the truck. But I'm just thinking, okay, I don't know what this is. Maybe I ought to just go ahead and roll the windows up, start the truck. Because I'm not really that scared of anything in the dark. Not up there. I mean, yeah, there could be a mountain lion, it could be a bear. Most likely not, but you don't want to take any chances. Well, a few minutes later, I just get this weird sensation, and right beside my window, something moved into the window because it was down, and it wasn't an odor like you always hear associated with Bigfoot, but it was a very heavy, musky odor, and it was thick air, like almost suffocating, like something was covering that entire window. And like I said, I'm not one to get scared. Not in the woods, not in the dark, anything like that. And especially with, I have a gun with me. I'm not scared. But when that happened, when that just loomed over me and over that window like that, I could feel it standing right there, whatever that was. And the next thing I know, I'm at the store at Hodnubby Creek. And that's a good 20 minutes away. And like I said, that trailer and that truck maneuvering through the woods like that, down that little trail to get out to the highway, I don't remember it. I don't remember how I got from there to the store.
Wow.
So that was a wild experience, and I probably sit there and just trying to think about, well, how did I get here and why? I don't know what happened.
So that's about 20. But you had about 20 minutes of missing time then, and
yeah.
That's often associated with the alien abduction accounts, the missing time. So that's wow, that's pretty intriguing that you had 20 minutes just unaccounted for there.
Yeah, it was at least 20 minutes because that's how long it would take to get there. Even driving super fast, and you can't really drive super fast over those mountain roads like that. So it's a solid 20-minute drive, and I have no idea.
Wow. That's kind of that's a little bit creepy to think about that that you had that particular experience. Now we're kind of getting short on time, Paul, but what about? I just wanted to ask you real quick. What about unexplained disappearances? David Paulides writes about it. There's been a lot of unexplained disappearances in certain parts of the country. Well, really all over the country. There's some really, really big cluster areas, more in the western half of the U.S., I think. What about in areas in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, not so much missing here, but I don't know if what I put behind a lot of that, because I've seen a lot of his stuff, and it's fascinating. But honestly, I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and I've hunted in strange woods before, where I've only been there the first time or not very often. And as good as I am in the woods, I have every confidence in the world that you could put me anywhere and I could find my way out. But as good as I am out there, I've gotten lost before. And, I know how easy it is to get turned around. And no matter how experienced you are, if an event occurs while you're out there, any type of a traumatic event, say you fall and you have you break an ankle or break an arm or anything like that, that particular event itself is a catalyst behind making you lose your whereabouts, so to speak. And you can get lost incredibly easy. I remember as a kid, a little funny story here in Oklahoma. Us boys, we would go out into the woods and we would have little BB gun wars. Yeah, we were idiot. But being out there, it's funny that you can walk right beside somebody just standing there looking at you, and you never even see them because your eyes are not trained to see something that's not moving. Not in the woods. If something moves and catches your eye, yeah, your eye would probably focus on it, but there's so many different dynamics that's happening out in the woods that you don't really see that. And you can walk right by somebody and not ever see them at all. Right. So I can see where, there's probably a lot of mystery behind a lot of these disappearances, but I think there's a lot of simple explanations behind them as well.
Yeah, and perhaps there are some there. There are some that are so bizarre, though, that you're left just kind of scratching your head. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard a few of those from David Pilotti's stuff. It's fascinating, and it leaves you scratching your head, wondering, well, how in the world, could this have happened? Sure. But yeah, Paul. Like I said, we're kind of short on time. If you could share whether there's website, where people can find your books, and find out more about you and your work. Yeah, absolutely. You can always go to my site, which is paulgbuckner.com, or you can even do a search for me on Amazon. And my latest one will be coming out later this fall, and it's volume 2. And there's some really fascinating stories about some investigations and research that I've done with some folks that I've interviewed. One in particular in Honappy Creek, which is a very fascinating area, and an area where there's been a hotbed of sightings through the years. So, but that particular story that will be in this upcoming book is one of habituation. So I think that's a very interesting story. Sounds good. Well, how soon do you expect that volume 2 of the book to be coming out? I believe it's going to hit sometime in early November. Okay, good. Well, Paul, it's been great talking with you. Some intriguing stuff you shared. Appreciate you sharing the stories with us. Appreciate you talking with me tonight, and hopefully we'll have you on again down the road. We can talk some more about these stories and maybe some you cover in the latest book. Oh, absolutely. Would love to, and I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much. It's been enjoyable. Yeah, absolutely, and have yourself a great rest of your night, Paul, and once again, thank you for talking with me. Absolutely. You too. Bye-bye.